All right, I think we're recording now. So welcome everyone to Reimagining Religious Community, a webinar from the MidAmerica Region of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I'm Phil Lund. I am a congregational life consultant for said MidAmerica Region. And one of the things we like to do is do webinars. It's a great way to reach people throughout our very large region. And also to share not just our expertise, if we could dare say that, but also we like to do webinars with other people and bring in, lay leaders and ministers and guests and stuff like that. So I hope you take advantage of these. We're working on getting our webinars set up for next winter, January, February, March. So you should be hearing about those soon. But this webinar is about reimagining religious community. And as I was saying earlier, I've been thinking about these subjects for a long time, and I just keep finding more and more resources, which I'm going to share a bunch of them with you as well. And one thing I just want to say up front, while the newest and the latest stuff sounds really cool, sometimes there's things from 10, 15, 20 years ago that actually were like pointing in the right direction. I'm always amazed when I look at resources. I find somebody was like talked about it 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. So I'm going to be sharing a mix of some older and some newer resources, and hopefully all together it will give us some idea about how we can approach this idea of concept of reimagining religious community. Okay, sound good? And they're going to be nodding and everything. Excellent. So excited. All right, I'm going to share that screen again. Go into my next slide. And that slide is this one. And what I want to say about this is a book by Robert Wuthnow called After Heaven, Spirituality in America Since the 1950s. And Robert Wuthnow is one of the first people I know of who really addressed the question, why do millions of Americans claim they are spiritual but not religious? I know that term's been around for a long time. People are really writing about a lot about it now, like, oh, how do we reach out to the spiritual but not religious? But Robert Wuthnow was doing this back in the 90s, and this book was written in 1998. So at the end of the last century. And what Wuthnow did is he looked at the history of kind of spirituality and church going in America, as the book subtitle says, since the 1950s. And he came up with this idea that there are two kinds of spirituality going on. And of course, there's more than two, but this is just one nice general frame to start looking at it with. And he called one the spirituality of dwelling, a spirituality of dwelling, and the other he called a spirituality of seeking. And I have a little excerpt here from a couple folks, Susan McFadden and Mark Brenani, that really explain clearly what Wuthnow is getting at. And before I read it to you, I just want to let you know right now, tomorrow, I'm going to send an email to y'all. It will have a link to the recording because, you're going to just all be so excited about it. You're going to want to share it with so many people in your congregation. And so you'll have a link to it. But it'll also have all the resources that I'm mentioning here. So don't feel like you have to scribble everything down. Scribble if you must, if you feel like that's going to work for you. But I'm going to send you all the resources I have here, including the slideshow and everything. So, all right. So here's what McFadden and Brenani said about Robert Wuthnow's distinction here. They say Wuthnow has distinguished between religious dwellers whose relation to the sacred is mediated by traditional forms of religious authority, and spiritual seekers for whom individual autonomy appears to take precedence over external authority. Okay. In other words, the dwellers find it comforting to inhabit a space that is created for them by established religious institutions, and one that is steeped in centuries of tradition. And certainly those of us who really like being in our religious communities, who like church, who love our tradition going way back to Transylvania and Francis David and everything, we're in some ways dwellers, okay? In contrast, the seekers are explorers who are most comfortable in occupying a space that is largely of their own creation, although the materials used to construct and demarcate this space are typically borrowed from existing religious traditions. Whereas dwellers are concerned about the freedom to exercise individual conscience within the framework of established organized religious institutions, seekers place an emphasis on the freedom to choose among the various religious strands that span Western and Eastern traditions. Unlike religious dwellers, spiritual seekers place a greater emphasis on personal growth and healing, emotional self-fulfillment, and finding the sacred in everyday life. Now, one thing I want to point out, this idea that dwellers are concerned about the freedom to exercise individual conscience within the framework of an established organized religious institution, that was a strong point for Unitarian Universalists amongst free thinkers and intellectuals, and they could find a place where they could have their own beliefs still. They could approach life and the universe and whatever they wanted without a lot of dogma laid on top of it. And so those really are, I think, our dwellers, people who say, oh, I finally found a religious home that allows me to be me, but I can still engage in all the activities of church that I like, worship services, small group meetings. I am a big fan of potlucks. So, that's me, seriously. I am a big fan of potlucks. So, we like these religious institutions, whereas seekers, they're out in the spiritual marketplace, and they're just trying to find places, and it may not be any single one place, and it may not be for a very long time, but places that help them develop their spirituality. Okay, so now what Wuthnow did in this book, and this is why I think it's still super important, is he came up with a middle ground here between a spirituality of dwelling and a spirituality of seeking, and he calls it practice-oriented spirituality. Okay, and I have here, Wuthnow believes that a practice-oriented spirituality should be considered seriously as an alternative to dwelling and seeking spiritualities. Okay, so he's provided us with some thoughts about a third way. And the idea, as the name suggests, is that it's oriented around practice. And by practice, Wuthnow means engaging intentionally in activities that deepen one's relationship to the sacred. Engaging intentionally in activities that deepen one's relationship to the sacred. And so Marianne and Frederick Bresser, in their review of After Heaven at spirituality.com, they talk about how Wuthnow delineates some of the characteristics of spiritual practice. So when he's talking about practice, these are the kind of things he's talking about. 1, prayer, devotional reading, and service to others. It's interesting they put those all together. 2, an intention to deepen contact with the divine, the holy, the source of being, whatever language you want to use for it. 3, discernment. 4, an orderly and regular approach to ritual. So it's not haphazard. You do it in some sort of orderly fashion. A revisioning of the self. You are working on yourself. We might call it self-actualization, something like that, but that's part of what you're doing. A sharing of our experiences and stories with others, and so this is very important because it happens in community. The use of a wide variety of resources for inner work. So we saw him mention that with or when talking about this, the seeker-oriented spirituality. They like to bring in things from a wide variety of resources, and an emphasis upon an ethical dimension. Wuthnow Withnow wisely concludes the point of spiritual practice is not to elevate an isolated set of activities over the rest of life, but to electrify the spiritual impulse that animates all of life. Okay? So I like how he talks about spirituality, you know. He's not talking about, you know, being in contact with God or anything like that, but it's something that the word he uses is electrify the spiritual impulse that animates all of life. So it's this very, you know, engaging sort of activity. And so practice then, according to another resource about looking at Wirthnow's book, practice is intentional, disciplined, and long-term. It involves self-reflection and discernment. It is interlaced with daily life. Remember, that was that thing about finding the sacred in daily life too. It has a social dimension. That's where there's still room for religious community. It's guided by rules. Like I said, it's not haphazard. There's that orderly approach to it. It leads to a life of service. And this is, you know, back when people were first starting to talk about spirituality in Unitarian Universalist circles, and this was in the mid to late 90s, is when the word was cropping up and people were saying, well, that's just navel gazing, you know, that's just going internally, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't do anything to help change the world. But real spiritual practice leads to a life of service. And this is very important too, because this is what spiritual seekers are looking for, is an opportunity to have a life of service. And then finally, the practice is rewarding. You get benefits out of it. It's not just to do it, you know, because you're supposed to. You do it because you get actual benefits out of it. Okay? Am I going all right? A good pace. I'm not going too fast here. I'm not going too slow. I could speed up. No, just keep it where it is. All right. Okay. So that was 1998. Now there's another book that I really like. Kind of was published in 2001 by John Ackerman. It's called Listening to God, Spiritual Formation in Congregations. And the thing I think that's really interesting about this is just 3 years after Withnow's book was published, but Withnow's book has already influenced John Ackerman when he's writing about spirituality in congregations. So it immediately had an impact. And I have to tell you, almost every book on spirituality in the United States in the 21st century, they mention Withnow and those three kinds of spirituality somewhere in there. So what Ackerman did is he kind of took these three styles and he looked at how they really play out in a religious community. And that's what we're here to do tonight, is to say, well, how can we reimagine what we do? And so these are some ways of looking at religious community, and it'll give us some sense of maybe what we can start doing to reimagine a little bit. So here's what he did. Let me see, let me shrink that a little bit for you. There we go. All right, so what he did is he's looking at his three styles of religion, contemporary religion. He looked at who's responsible for spiritual growth, who has authority, where does the formation take place. He talks about prayer, and I think lots of ways to look at prayer, but I think one way in regards to religious community is how does the community reflect its spirituality back, you know, into the world? How do they speak it? What do you say? How do you do it? You know, and then what kind of spirituality is and how leaders are credentialed. So in the old style religion, which is pretty much a Unitarian Universalist congregation still, because this is what we come out of, the responsibility for spiritual growth is in the hierarchy. You know, things have changed, but once upon a time, pretty much the only person who talked about any sort of thing that could be considered spiritual growth was the minister from the pulpit, perhaps, you know. Also teaching, the professors or people who've learned things from professors and are teaching it in the congregations, and the authors, the people who are writing about it. So who is the authority? The experts are the authority. And how does spiritual formation take place? In kind of the standard things that you do in an old style congregation. In some of them, you have sacraments, so you'd have the Eucharist and things like that. But we have worship, we have study, we have adult religious education. So that's where spiritual formation traditionally took place. prayer, how we reflected it out in the world, was done by experts, and it was taught by experts. And this is the spirituality of dwelling. And a very important thing here is that leaders are credentialed by academic preparation. And so I went to Meadville Lombard right around the time these books were written. I started in 1998. And when I was there, they talked a lot, not a whole lot, but enough about the idea of the learned clergy. Have you ever heard that before? The learned clergy. It sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like. You wear Geneva gowns, and you read piles of books on process theology, and you're able to share all that stuff. And that was very important for the longest time in our congregations. I'm up here in the Twin Cities, and in Minneapolis at the First Unitarian Society, Corin Aracian was their minister for the longest time. And he would take 24 hours, like on Wednesday, and write a sermon. And then on Sunday morning, the pews were packed. No, they probably don't call them pews. The seats were packed because people wanted to hear what Corin Aracian had to say, what he was thinking. And that was because he was very learned clergy, and he was preaching to humanists, and they really enjoyed his message, and it was intellectual. And and actually, I'll just confess, their new minister, who's a friend of mine, I really, really like him a lot, David Breeden. He's a poet, but he's also a professor. And so they like him that he's a professor too, so they like those academic credentials still. All right. So that's the old style. Now contrast that with New Age style. Gonna recenter that for you. Who has responsibility for spiritual growth? The individual. Who is it? Who is the authority? Well, me. I am, of course. How does spiritual formation take place? You pick and choose. So remember, you would, Eastern and Western traditions, and you're trying to put something together. So you're picking and choosing from various things. This prayer is, everything is prayer. Everything is a reflection of the divine back into the world. Lillian Daniels has some stuff to say about that, where, there's always sunsets and, walks on the beach, and a sunset on the beach is like this super spiritual experience, and so it's everywhere, which is true. But if you're picking and choosing, you don't have that that ritual aspect to it, that rule thing that might make it more meaningful. And that's her point. These things are much more meaningful when we do them in community. So this is the spirituality of seeking, and the experts here, the leaders are credentialed by being experts in the field. And what we mean by that is people who write books like Robert Withnaw, or people who do retreats like Richard Rohr. People pay money to go to hear from their teachers because they've established themselves as being experts in spirituality. I'm that way. I like to read books from spiritual leaders. It helps me. So that's where that comes from. So what's interesting here is John Ackerman in 2001, 2002 was seeing this emerging kind of religion. And this is where practice-oriented spirituality can be lived out, okay? So who's responsible? The local congregation. The community is responsible for spiritual growth. Who is the authority? Everyone, our common life together. We're helping one another. That's actually in our principles and purposes, isn't it? Encouragement to spiritual growth. How does spiritual formation take place? By being in community. I think Unitarian Universalists, we have this great leg up here, because I think spiritual formation takes place best when you're kind of rubbing elbows with people who have different beliefs than you, and you kind of have to negotiate that. So being in community is where spiritual formation takes place. How is this reflected back out in the world? Through prayer. The community teaches us how we're going to do this. It's very, based on the community. So he calls this spirituality journeying together. I would say it's kind of the living out of that practice-oriented spirituality. And here's a very important thing then. The leaders are credentialed by their spiritual experience. Does that make sense? People who gather in this kind of community, they want to know that the leaders are are actively working on their spiritual lives as well, and they're talking about it, they're sharing about it, and they're helping you do it from where they're coming from. So it's a different kind of religious community, okay? So as we talk about reimagining religious community, we can see, on one column, the old style, and the other, the new age, which is kind of pick and choose and hit and miss, and, they might go to a Unitarian church for a while and then, move along. And then this emerging kind of community. And so that's really what I want to focus on with our session here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. And now I'm going to unmute everybody. So that means if you've been chewing on something loudly, you might want to, stop chewing. Okay. All right. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to unmute see if we have any questions or comments right now. All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Oh, hello. You're all there. So how you doing? Is making sense? Yeah. Have anybody heard about this stuff before? No? See? It's fresh. It's new. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions so far? Alexis?
I suspect you might get to this, but I'm curious about how to build up a mature and intentional community.
So say one more time?
I might write it out because I'm getting an echo,
okay.
but how to support the members to become mature and intentional.
Excellent question. We are going to get to that.
I had a feeling because I've taken webinars with you.
That's the question. Yes. This is where the reimagining comes in, is how do we start to really focus on, it's going to be spiritual transformation and continuous improvement, which in Unitarian Universalist terms, I've been told that William Ellery Channing said, that we're infinitely perfectible. So on your spiritual journey, we're not saying you reach nirvana and, that's it. No, you can always be doing this continual improvement. So we're going to talk about that. Thank you, Alexis.
One question
yes.
that I would have, we're in a congregation where we're not in a large city, which means we draw a lot of folks who are at our congregation who are not what they would define themselves as religious,
right.
or spiritual. We have a lot of atheists and in our community. And so even this dynamic of practice-oriented spirituality is something that would be a real challenge for them from a language perspective.
Right.
And I could see some things, components of the practice-oriented spirituality that are not necessarily spiritual.
Yes.
But that was just my first reaction is a lot of people in our congregation struggle with even the word spiritual.
Correct.
They don't see themselves as spiritual beings,
yeah,
or on a spiritual journey, but yet they're very much a vital part of our what would be called a religious community.
Right.
That's really challenging.
Yeah, and I think you were getting to something where you say you saw some of those things in there that might not necessarily be spiritual. You could do some of that stuff without labeling it spiritual. And right. I think that's a really good approach to take, So I think there are ways to take a lot of stuff we're already doing, and I think that's the challenge here. A lot of stuff we're already doing and kind of make it the opportunity to go deeper. If they were kind of staying on a surface level, maybe we can go a little deeper with them. Just lots of places we might be able to do that. And that's something to talk about, definitely. As I was saying, everybody's going to have individual circumstances here, and their congregations might respond to this sort of thing in different ways. So I personally love to kind of figure out, well, how can I talk about this in a way that people can understand? And there's a lot of ways of approaching spirituality where you break it down into how it functions in your lives. Like it helps you make meaning. It helps you feel belonging. It helps, have a sense of being and agency in the universe. You can break it down into various functions of spirituality and work on them. And so you're helping people with their spiritual development without necessarily calling it spirituality. So, and that's the goal, though, is we really do want to help people live as full and as meaningful a life as possible, How are we going to do that? And that's, I think, this opportunity to reimagine our religious communities. Well, thank you all for that little break. I wanted to hear some other voices there other than mine, because, I can only tolerate my voice for just 3 or 4 hours, and then I have to stop.
Hey, Phil.
So, all right. Yes. Hey, Sam.
Would you say that spirituality and meaning are the same?
Spirituality and meaning?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, John Ackerman, I don't have this quote in here, but he does say that spirituality generically is a search for meaning and to be part of something larger than yourself. So we have the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. For some people, that is the core of some religious, Christian, spiritual people. That's the core of spirituality still. And we have it laid out because Ackerman's a Christian. So he uses that language. So yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Sam, I would, definitely. Okay, should I move along to the next section? Okay, here we go. I'm going to mute you all again. Here we go, muting all. And I'm going to share the screen again, and I'm going to move on to the next one. Okay, this is where I actually got the terminology for reimagined religious community. This comes from Brie Lasoka from the Center for Religion and Civic Culture at the University of Southern California. This was actually a blog post called Reimagining Religion, the 10 Qualities of Creative Communities. And it comes from a conference they did called Reimagining Religion, a conversation about the future of religion. So it's all about what we're covering tonight. So what they did, this Center for Religion and Culture, they looked at a lot of congregations in Los Angeles, and they point out that Los Angeles is probably the most religiously diverse city in the world. Okay, a lot of stuff happens in Los Angeles. Big population, creative people, engaged, a lot of work to do around lots of social issues, a lot of people who are acquainted with spiritual practice and stuff, looking for a home. So a lot of stuff going on in Los Angeles. And it's also where they're located, right? So, but they also did some stuff in Korea too. And what they found is that these new religious communities that are springing up, and we'll have some examples later, have some shared qualities. They're bounded, authentic, embedded, pollinating, embodied, activated, empathetic, networked, enfranchised, and adaptive. And I'm going to go through those all one at a time for you, okay? So the first one is bounded. There we go. While they are innovating and pushing boundaries, they are constrained by forms of religious traditions or ways of operating. So you can see right away with that New Age me sort of religion that Ackerman talked about, they put some boundaries on that, right? And that's where that ritual comes in, perhaps. That's where the rule comes in. So these communities are innovative, but they also are bounded, all right? They're authentic. Communities ground truth not in abstract concepts, but in ideas with internal and intuitive resonance, okay? So it doesn't mean that these ideas don't have intellectual qualities or don't have some abstractions that you can talk about, but the point is that the people who join these communities are sticking with them because they're feeling something internally saying, this is it, this is authentic, this is where I want to be, okay? And we'll see some of the reasons why they might think that too. They're embedded. I love this. This is like my absolute thing I would preach until I passed out. These groups are committed to a particular place and want to make a difference there. Where these groups are located is highly significant, okay? Now, start where you are, wherever your congregation is, that's great. Why are you in that community and what can you do? So they are embedded. I think that's one of the most important things. They're pollinating. These communities are interested in spreading ideas rather than establishing institutions. They are not interested in institutional life itself. In fact, many of them are very organic. They live, they grow, and they decrease, okay? we have had a narrative for so long that success was counted in growing membership in your congregations. These people are doing things, these communities, they're doing things where that is not the measure of, their worth. Okay. So if the numbers go up and down, it doesn't mean they're being extra successful and then failing. It's just natural. It's organic. And some of them, I said decrease, but actually decease too. Some of them just cease to do what they're doing, and they're fine with it. They did what they did for a while. Okay. Whereas, if we start a church, we think it's going to be here forever, and we do have some churches that have been here for a darn long time. So they're embodied. Okay. The groups are interested in the somatic or bodily experience because of the belief that knowledge and value is gained from the somatic. Okay, so this is not that it's non-intellectual, but it balances the intellectual with the body. So it's an embodied religious community. Activated, these communities are not just congregations with ideas. They enact their vision for a better world and make things happen. Okay. They are doing things in the world. Part of the way they do that is they're empathetic. Actions to enact change are grounded in empathy, care, and compassion, often for marginalized people. Okay, so I see these communities, they have dwellers, people who really are involved in making the work happen there. They have seekers, probably people who come through and check them out. But they also have the marginalized people that they are working with. They're in their communities working with marginalized people. They're networked. These communities are strongly connected within and across traditions. So they're not just, giving up on traditions. In fact, they're being connected among traditions. So they're interfaith, they're interspiritual, they're working with other religious groups in their communities. So they're really, when they get out into their world, into their community, they're engaging in lots of different ways, including working with other religious traditions. This is very important too. They're enfranchised. These groups do not have a strict hierarchy. Instead, they welcome ideas from all sides. Okay. We've been moving towards this slowly in Unitarian Universalism, I think. Worship has opened up a lot. It used to be totally the minister was responsible for worship. Now we have worship associates. We have resources like Soul Matters and Touchstones and stuff, where everybody has access to things that can help build worship and do small group ministry and all sorts of things. So, ideas are welcome from all sides. You can be involved in lots of ways. And also, if we go back to what Ackerman said, so these are the people with the spiritual experience too, who might be engaged in bringing their ideas to all sides, okay? And then finally, they're adaptive. These communities respond to new social challenges and opportunities with a sense of possibility rather than a sense of fear, okay? And, that's kind of tough. Possibilities, sense of possibilities is a little hard these days, but, these communities are living that out. So when I first saw this, I was like, wow, I would love to get these ideas into our congregation somehow. And this is how I'm doing it. So it's up to you to take them into your congregations now. But the idea is that these are things that we can ask ourselves, how responsive are we to new social challenges and opportunities, how empathetic and compassionate and caring are we when we work with the people in the community? How organic are we? Are we able to see our numbers, rise and fall and not get all anxious? So these are good questions to ask. So I really like these 10 creative qualities, but and for a while this was like, oh, that's it. These are great. But I found another resource that I think refines these a little bit more. And what I like about this, they kind of present them in a way where it's kind of a statement about who we are. Okay, so it's from Casper Tuckule and Angie Thurston. They went to Harvard Divinity School. I think they did a lot of this work while they were students. They wrote a report for the Fetzer Institute called Where We Belong, Mapping Americans' Religious Innovation. So where the University of Southern California people called it creative communities, they're calling it innovation. And that's a word I'm hearing a lot these days, innovation. So what they did is they came up with seven components of the cultural DNA of these kind of innovative, creative, spiritual communities, okay? So, there's a picture of the report in case you wanted to see it. It looks like that. I'll send you the link to it. It's free and a lot of great stuff in it. Really worth taking a look at. But here are their seven, components of their cultural DNA. Communities like this are open, and they would say something like, you are welcome wherever you are in your journey, whatever identities you hold. You are welcome. So they're open to everyone. And, I like to point out that's what liberal religion is. We're liberal with it. We're inviting, we're giving it away and inviting people in. That's really part of what that word means. It's experiential. Your experience of truth supersedes doctrine. So that's that idea of rubbing elbows with people who might have some different ideas and beliefs about spirituality and truth, but you're with them because that's important. They're participatory. And that's one of the key words when we mentioned before that the creative communities were enfranchised, that they don't have a strict hierarchy. They're participatory. You co-create rather than consume this community. You co-create this community. And these are words, participatory and co-create. These are big words that I've been hearing a lot lately. And I'm just starting to look into this, but I really think they're essential for innovation, So I think this is one of the real keys to innovation in religious community. They're respectfully missional. And I know missional is like, what is that? Some sort of evangelical word. But what they say is, we're clear about who we are and hope you'll join us. So being missional is just like, we are clear about our approach to the world, our beliefs, and we hope you join us. And they're very just clear about it. But the respectful part is, we hope you join us. They're not proselytizing or anything like that. The word authentic comes up again. We want all of you, what you're proud of and what you're not proud of. One of the places that they talk about is the Church of all Sinners and Saints. Do people know that one? Yeah, that's Nadia Boltz-Weber. Is that? Anyway, she's in Denver, I believe it is. It's a Lutheran church, actually, but it's just this completely authentic sort of, church about meeting people where they are. It's countercultural. What we do here goes against dominant consumer culture because other things matter more. And the important thing is that other things matter more. When I was saying the John Ackerman's definition of spirituality, the search for meaning, yes, but wanting to belong to something larger than our consumer culture, something larger of what we're faced with every day. And those are the things that matter more. And then again, serving others. These communities are about serving. We can only be our true selves when we are serving others. Okay. So in the previous one, we talked about empathetic and engaging in actions with marginalized people. So this is part of what's going on with these newer sort of innovative communities. So I'm giving you all this. When you start to think about, well, what does it mean to reimagine our community? This is what it means, I think. I'm getting something. I got something in the chat. Let me just take a look. Oh, thank you, Alexis. Yeah, Church of All Sinners and Saints with Pastor Nadia Boltz-Weber. Yeah, I think I got it right. Yeah, all right. Yeah, she's really amazing, and they're doing amazing stuff in there. And they have a write-up of this in this report. That's one of their examples of these communities. So let's look at what some of these communities are like. And so this is really, what I'm hoping here is this is the part where, the neurons and synapses do whatever they're supposed to do. And you get some ideas here about what you might do to have a reimagined religious community. So moving on, let me see here. I just, what happened here? There we go. These, some people are doing dinner churches. And for all of these things I'm going to list, this is the only thing they do, okay? This is their religious community. Some people do dinner churches. They gather around a meal for reflection, inspiration, and conversation. That is what church is. Some are service organizations, and they're focused on social action. They do it from a spiritual religious perspective, but what they do is primarily social action, okay? Learning journeys, a time-bound program of spiritual growth and leadership development. That might be one of those things that kind of, grows and increases and decreases, and then they're done for a while because they've planned a learning journey and it's time-bound, and that's experience they're going to do. And maybe they'll do another one, maybe they're not. But this is their spiritual experience at that point. And this is their religious community doing that learning journey. Some are online communities, often for participants who would struggle to find a local group aligned strongly to their particular practice or identity. And we have that with the Church of the Larger Fellowship, I believe, which used to be the mail order church for the UUA. And now it's the online church, pretty much. They have a very robust online presence, and they offer small group ministry and just all sorts of things. So we have an online community like that. Resources, media, practical support, and storytelling organizations. In the report, they talk about Relevant Media, which publishes this Relevant magazine, and it's for millennial Christians. And it's a really high-quality product, but it's very, they're a little too orthodox for me in terms of Christianity, but it's very open to their generation, to millennials, and it's just a really great resource. And they tell a wonderful story where they finally got around to having a live studio audience to attend one of their podcasts that had been recorded. People flew in from around the country because it was their opportunity to be with their community. Because this was their community, the people who brought these resources out and then brought them together too. So that just shows you how strong these kind of, the pull of these kind of different kinds of religious communities can be. We also have, I'll just slide on up. Co-living working spaces. Let's see. Using space in innovative ways to bring people together. So we have co-living in Unitarian Universalism, the Lucy Stone collectives. There's a few places young adults are living together as Unitarian Universalists wanting to live out their faith. I've also heard of groups of young religious people who start a business, and that's their religious community. So a coffee shop or something like that, because they want to be present in their community and they want to do something that is giving to their community, and that's their religious community. This next one, small groups. This is the one I'm really in. Small groups focusing on spiritual growth and vulnerability. So I've done training in spiritual direction, and I'm a big proponent of group spiritual direction. And what it lets you do is have that opportunity to reflect on your own spiritual growth and be vulnerable with one another. And it's, search for truth and meaning. Church with a twist. Worship services in unusual spaces or formats. And not just like the Sunday morning. Well, okay. I'm thinking we do this occasionally. We'll get out like on the solstice, right? Winter solstice or summer solstice. We'll get out and maybe do something in the park or something like that. But, we can be doing worship services in different places at different times with different people. I mean, one way would be, one I always think about is have a community service project and have a worship service in the place where you're doing the community service project right before you do it. But it's worship, Take some of our traditional components, which is the next one, and do it someplace else. So we have combining tradition and innovation, taking the best of liturgy and tradition and living it in new ways. And I think that's something we it's a great opportunity when we think about reimagining our religious communities. It's like we have a lot of great, resources in Unitarian Universalism that we could be taking and, using it and living out in new ways. So worship, Sunday mornings, sermons, all this stuff can all be kind of redone and reconfigured in ways that makes it closer to that emerging kind of religion than we are in the old style religion. And then finally, social networks, a looser network of relationships with a common goal. That's not necessarily online, but a social network within a community. So up here, we still have some meetup groups doing UU things, but they try to gather UUs from the community and they publish events and they talk about who's going, and people meet and interact that way through that network, but it's very loose. It's a very loose network. Okay, so that's from the Fetzer report, Where We Belong. I'm going to send you that resource in the email tomorrow. I do hope you'll take a look at it. I think it's really one of the best things that's come along talking about innovation and religion. And they talked to Kerry McDonald, our new chief operating officer at the UUA. He was our outreach director. They interview him about what we're doing here in Unitarian Universalists in terms of innovative communities. So, all right. I'm going to keep on plowing forward. So the next thing then is, we heard a little about this earlier, how do we start to focus people on this? And this is a book from Charles Duffert called Lean Ministry, Implementing Change in the 21st Century. I'm going to tell you the truth about this book. Lean manufacturing, lean entrepreneurism is like a thing. Okay, has anybody heard of it before? I only know, oh, you have it? Okay, Aaron. I only know it from like lean meat, lean cuisine. Anyway, so it was a thing. And oftentimes when there's like a thing in business, somebody tries to make it a thing in church. Okay, so Charles wrote this book, and it didn't take off from what I can tell. Okay, too bad, Charles. But it doesn't mean that there are no good ideas in there. It's just it didn't quite take off. But here's what I love about it. This is what they just start out with. The goal, I haven't written them up. The goal is to achieve spiritual transformation and continuous spiritual improvement. That's the goal of being in a religious community. Okay, now, we have that when we talk about the search for truth and meaning. We have that when we talk about encouragement to spiritual growth. We already talk about that. But the goal of the church then is to focus its resources on the transformation of its people. And I think that's what these innovative communities are doing. When they look at all their resources, they're saying, how do we use these to transform people for the better? So they have, like a fuller, more meaningful life, and how can they have a life of service? And how can they have better relationships with their family and their friends and the environment, strangers? They're helping people do that. So I really think that these innovative communities, that this is what actually they are focusing on. Okay. So personally, if I were the pastor of a church right now, these would be my goals, and I wouldn't be shy about it. I would let people know that's why we're here. But again, it's not navel gazing. You're transforming your life, but we're transforming the world too. And, that's the Unitarian Universalist way, I think. Yes, I think so, right? Okay. So here's the thing with this lean business, okay? The elimination of waste is the primary goal of any lean system. The elimination of waste, okay? I'm gonna tell you a little bit about this elimination of waste idea, and then I'm also gonna try to make it not sound so cut and dried. I'm gonna make it a positive thing, okay? But what the lean people do, I just love this. They look at Japanese industrial engineer Shigeo Shingo. Anybody heard of Shigeo Shingo? He's the person who really got the Toyota production system, the envy of automaking around the world, Toyota figured out how to just do so many things with their industrial process. It was just amazing. And a part of it was, because of Shinjio Shingo. And so here are the 7 kind of wastes he talks about. Overproduction, producing more than what is needed or required. That's a waste. Correction, producing defective products that are either repaired or scrapped. Okay. Inventory, stocking raw materials, work in process, and finished goods that are not required to fulfill customers' needs. Inventory uses additional handling and space, which should have been used for valuable purposes. Waiting, idle time waiting for something to get done. Motion, unnecessary human movements that do not add value to the product. Movement. I'm supposed to be going through these. Here they are. There we go. I had them all ready to go, Yeah, all right. And they're in different colors. They're like really, Anyway, okay. Movement. Moving or transporting materials, information, and people from one location to another. And then finally, over-processing. Additional processing of parts and products beyond what is required by the customer. Okay? So now here's the thing. Before we look at how this works in a church, we're going to put a really positive spin on it. Okay? Isn't this lovely picture? Isn't it? Do you know what this is? This is from the Burren in Ireland, which Burren is comes from an Irish word that means the rocky place. And this, I'm going to read you a little something from Patrick O'Donoghue, who is the brother of poet John O'Donoghue, and they lived in this area, the Burren. And what I hope we can do is kind of change this idea of waste into just kind of thinking in terms of obstacles, and that obstacles aren't necessarily bad, okay? Because I think this is going to be a key to reimagining our religious communities. It's like everything is an opportunity, everything is a possibility. Okay, it's not like, oh, we got to go take care of this, and that happening there needs to be stricken from our community, and everything is like, these are all opportunities. Okay, but here's what he said. I just love it. Here in the Burren, and imagine somebody doing with an Irish accent, because it'll just be so much better. But here in the Burren, you are befriended by rocks and stones wherever you go. They only become obstacles if you can't find your way around them. When we were being introduced to the world of garden and meadow, it was natural to see a massive gray conversation piece protruding through the brown soil or the green grass. The rows of vegetables never seemed perturbed as they continued around the possible obstacle, like the flow of the river meandering on its way further down the valley. In fact, the fruits of the garden often flourished in the vicinity of this rock. The heat of the limestone warmed the seed, and its size sheltered the tender young blossoms. It also presented the tired back with a justifiable occasion of straightening and rest. In a mysterious way, it seemed beneficial, if not necessary, to have a could-be obstacle in your path. Okay? So, as we kind of translate those wastes into just obstacles in a congregation, think of them as possibly being beneficial. That, this is an opportunity for us, okay? So I'm going to go through them again. I'm going to remember to turn the slide with each one. All right. So this is how Charles changed Durfit. This is how he changed the lean concept of eliminating waste into congregational terms, all right? Overproduction. Teaching and preaching to a big batch of people coming from different levels of spiritual transformation. Different levels of spiritual transformation. Now, I'm a minister and I preach, but oftentimes, sermons can be sort of a one-size-fits-all thing. And if that's really where a lot of the energy in church is going, that might be a form of overproduction. Does that make sense? Okay. Correction. Contentious beliefs arising either from defective theology or from theology taken out of context to serve selfish purposes. Okay, so Unitarian Universalism has this tradition of rugged individualism, and that can be, well, it's individualism. That can be used for a very selfish reason. And then also Kendall Gibbons, who's a humanist, she talks about flat earth humanism. And I think what she means by that is people who are only willing to see things from that perspective and wanting to keep the church kind of pure for only those kinds of perspectives. And actually, the current conversation about white supremacy culture, a lot of the culture that people are pointing to and saying that's white supremacy culture is the kind of culture where that old style religion came from. And so hanging on to those beliefs is not allowing us to have that co-creation, that participation that we could be having to have true innovation in our congregations. Okay? Inventory. Unused spiritual gifts. Church members who don't participate in their transformation process. Financial resources tied up in unnecessary edifices and other assets that are not directly involved in the transformation process. So looking at where your resources are going, and are they going places where they're not really helping us achieve the goals that we had about that continuous spiritual development. People waiting to be involved due to lack of resources. So you might have people who are raring to go with something, some sort of spiritual practice sort of thing, maybe a social justice thing, but we don't have the resources. Or people waiting for just the right sermon or the right class or the right teaching to address their spiritual needs. So we have people waiting. Motion, activities done by congregants that are associated with programs that do not impact on their transformation process. So that's a challenge, and I think it's a good challenge too. How do we make as much of the work involved in the church be work that contributes to one's spiritual transformation and continuous improvement? This one's interesting. Engaging our movement. No, I did motion first. Yeah, we did motion. Okay, then movement. Engaging people from program to program with no regard to where they are in the transformation process. So just kind of moving people from like, we do this, and here's another learning opportunity, and here's this, without actually looking at where they are in their development. And John Roberto in Faith Formation 2020, way back in the latter part of the first decade of this century, he talked about differentiated faith formation, and I really see what that's about. You really get a sense, you want to get a sense of where people are and make sure that there are opportunities for them. Not everything has to be a big program or anything like that, but we're going to see where people are, we're going to offer them opportunities rather than just having various programs to move them around in. Over processing, this is very interesting. Segregating the congregation based on demographics and not on their spiritual needs or transformation process. Preaching basic level sermons again and again, and also music, instruments, worship teams, choirs, and other productions having more entertainment value that impact on the transformation process. So right there, for me, that's an invitation to make like worship planning a spiritual growth experience rather than just like, okay, we need somebody to play piano, and okay, let's do this song. And I know oftentimes it is, and people in choirs and stuff get a lot out of it, but being intentional about it and understanding that it is part of the transformation process is the kind of change I think we're looking for. Okay? And yeah, all right. I'm going to stop there. How am I doing? Oh my God. There was just so much. It was just so much. I'm going to unmute you all now. Okay. So one thing I want to say is the resource I really want to offer you is something called these Love Reaches Out workshops that I've been doing, that they were done at the UUA. Carrie McDonald was involved in it, and Sarah Gibbs Millspawn, and a lot of people. But what they really do is they help congregations start to sort of rethinking. And you can do it with groups of people to really, get them looking at their community, looking at who they are, looking where the needs meet up, where they can offer something, where they can be with people in their community, and just start generating some new ideas. And it's been one of the most I don't know, helpful things I've seen like that. So what I'd like to offer you all is I'm happy to come and do these almost anywhere in the region if we get a group of congregations wanting to sponsor it together. I'm happy to come and do them. So I'll give you my email address earlier, and I would, really appreciate it if some of you wanted to do this, because I would be happy to come and do it. I'm going to do one on Saturday, and I'm doing one in January, and it's one of my favorite things to do. And mainly because I do think it gets the people who go through that experience really, really seeing these sorts of possibilities, So I will pause there, and we have some time now for some questions and answers, or just some questions and blank stares. Yes.
Hi, this is Robin over here.
Hey.
Hi.
Oh, there you are. Hey.
Yeah. Could you, in that last part of the thing where you were talking about applying lean principles to church?
Yes.
The motion part, I didn't quite get.
Well, okay, activities done by congregants that are associated with programs that do not impact in their transformation process.
Oh, okay.
Their own transformation process.
Okay.
So I'm remembering back in the day when we had newsletters, right, that got mailed out. And I was at a congregation that did a weekly newsletter. And every Wednesday, the newsletter stuffing team got together and stuffed the newsletter. And it was a great experience for them. But they just kept doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and chatting. And I'm just wondering, how much would it take to infuse that with just a little something that could make it, move them along in the transformation process? It could be as simple as reading something in the newsletter and discussing it if it's something about the transformation process or whatever. But so if there's something that people are doing that is really not leading to their spiritual growth, you might have to, look at it and say, well, what can we do with this that it could lead to that kind of transformation? Yeah?
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Other questions?
I think it's really interesting to hear the lean processing, because I was actually working in a factory during the lean processing movement.
That big craze.
Yeah. I mean, I was on the Kaizenning team,
and
I was I was. We made side view mirrors for cars. Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear it in a faith formation kind of context, and to not go, oh God, not that again.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. It did make you go, oh God, not that again.
It's very interesting because I remember what the specific production side pushback was.
Right. Okay, that's good to know.
There's that pushback, like the overproduction, like, oh no, but if we get ahead on parts, and then if we get ahead here, then we can help other people here. But then what really happens is you end up with more damaged parts.
Yeah, there you go.
So. And I can see that very much happening in churches.
If
we get ahead, we're going to be doing good. But then what really happens is we end up with people that get pushed out of the way or fall through the cracks. Yeah. And it's really interesting to think of it that way.
Yeah. So it's, it's just something to start saying, is this overproduction? Am I putting too much energy into this thing that's really going to have just a minimal effect on the goal? And just acknowledging and say, now what can I do differently? How can I kind of disperse this work? Do the sermons have to be 25 minutes long? I don't like to write them. They're too long, And so what can we do that's different? They start to become opportunities, like I said, with the Burin piece, it's like, okay, well, how do we start to work around this? And how do we engage with it in ways that might help us achieve the goal more? But thank you, Erin. I mean, I've just kind of found out about this lean stuff, and it's interesting. But the last thing you want to do in a church is say, we're going to start eliminating waste. It's like, I don't know. But we're going to start engaging with some of the obstacles in a very positive sort of way. I think could be helpful. Got about 5 more minutes. Yes.
Phil, I'd like to go back to something earlier that you said. When you were talking about the different kind of forms of innovative church, dinner churches, and and one that you mentioned was service organization.
Yeah.
Which is going to be more social action kind of oriented. Yeah. And I think I have a sense of what you're talking about there, but I'd like to have a kind of an idea of the distinction between that and like the old style getting together and forming a nonprofit, you know, a faith-based nonprofit or something.
Yeah.
What's the difference in this new model?
Well, and I think you'll get this too as a spiritual director, is what if you included group spiritual direction in what you did? What if you did the whole reflection process? What if you asked people how being part of this organization and what we just did, what was the impact on your growth? And you know, that was part of the deal. You know, we're going to be in this organization, we're going to do this social action, social justice work, but we're going to do it in a way that is transformative for us as individuals as well. And we're going to be in relation as we do it. This will be our religious community as we do this. And you may not have another one then. You may not go to church. You may not do anything, but you're doing something that is transforming you spiritually. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'm really kind of working in my head on how do you actually play that out? How do you enact it?
And and that's what this is all about. Is my hope is like something here, one little piece or something like that kind of said, oh yeah, okay, I can see maybe this might be a way to start approaching this. But I wanted to bring the obstacle thing up because this has been super hard for us to do this. And clearly there are some obstacles there, and just getting a sense of how to engage with those, I think is helpful, you know. We just got a couple more minutes. Is another question, comment we have right now?
I've got another question. With the work you've done and what you've seen with congregations that they've tried to do this kind of reimagining work, those that have been successful, do you see them tending to maybe narrow down their focuses, or expanding their focuses, or neither, or it's just all, you know, no one size fits all, obviously, but what have you seen? What have you observed?
Yeah, the narrowing down the focus, I think, is important. That's what the Love Reaches Out workshops kind of does. You come away with maybe three or four good ideas, and you start to try to find the one that we're going to engage in for this period of time. And then that's part of you direct the resources there as part of that transformational process for everyone. You know, you're not just doing it, you know, to be good. You're doing it to be better. You're doing it to transform yourself. So I think that in some ways that's very important to kind of narrow it a little bit. And so what I like, you know, what I say to churches is like, what else do you do here? And I don't want to hear a laundry list. You know, I want to hear the one or two things they're doing that's making a difference in the lives of the people in the religious community and the lives of the people in their larger community, you know, and it can't be more than one or two things. I don't think it can. You know, you need that kind of focus. And we haven't been that good about that. I mean, I remember congregations, you know, the Social Justice Committee was a committee that brought a different petition every week so they could get lots of signatures. And maybe something to do like write letters, you know, and stuff envelopes or something. That was it, you know, and it was just this ongoing flow of activity, but nothing that really focused that you could say, this is what we do as an expression of who we are in this community and our values, which is what the Love Reaches Out thing really gets to.
One other quick question. The word authentic came up a couple of times in a couple different places from different reports. I'm not sure I understand what it would be to be inauthentic. Can you give me an example of something that's inauthentic? Because I'm just not understanding that.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means even really.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm thinking just in group spiritual direction, we want people to be authentic there. But if somebody felt like they could not bring something to the group because they were, you know, ashamed of it or something like that, they would be holding back. And so, as I was taught, anytime you hold back on something like that, it's like turning down the volume on the radio. You're holding back on everything, you know. And so to kind of help people, you know, bring more parts of themselves, at least to some, you know, components of the experience, I think is important. So I think authenticity has a lot to do with your whole self. even the parts you may not be the happiest about, but being able to bring them somewhere. And that's my take on it. But. Well, it's 8 o'clock, people. You've been so wonderful. I've just enjoyed this so much. We're supposed to end at 8, right? Because I'm done. Okay, good. Let's go. I like to end on time.
There's a chat comment.
Okay.
From Sam.
Thank you.
You said overproduction was putting too much energy into something that doesn't lead to the goal. Okay, it's not transforming, right? So This is what gets me excited, is that spiritual transformation thing is the thing that Wuthno is talking about, and here are some ways to start enacting it. I think, starting with a goal. All right, now it's 8:01. We've gone over. What can I say? I wish I had some closing reading for you, but let me just say I really appreciate that you were all here. I really enjoyed it. I love doing this.
Thank you, Phil.
Please send me an email. Tell me what you're doing. I'm happy. Right, Alexis? Raise your hand. I'm happy to talk to you. Yes, I am. So let's have a conversation. Have a conversation about this and reimagine our religious communities. Okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks,
Thank
Phil.
you so much.
Thank
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.